working out with football and the major and everything is that they matches don't resume on the major goes until February 2nd, and then the qualifiers are back on February 14th.
Mm-hmm.
So the Super Bowl Sunday there won't be any COD that weekend.
Okay.
And I think I don't think they did that on purpose. They might have, but
Yeah, they might have. It's like there's literally nobody that's gonna care if we.
yeah, I think it just conveniently worked out that way. All right, I can hear myself talking about the Super Bowl, so that sounds good. Are you gonna have just don't retweet my tweet until during the show. Let's see if that changes anything, because if you retweet it right after I tweet it, then the same people are seeing it,
Yeah. Okay.
If it, I mean, it probably doesn't matter, but who knows? We could try it.
Yeah.
146 Ego Chall Podcast going over all this weekend matches. This past show requiring Team NBA and more links and replies. Post.
When you listen to the stream, do I sound all right?
Hold on.
Because I wanna make sure that it. I feel like there's feedback, but I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, you sound really good on the YouTube stream.
Okay, that sounds good then.
That's crazy.
The quality difference?
Can I mute you in Discord? And no, I would be delayed. Fuck.
Does it sound way better on the stream than on Discord?
Yeah.
It's probably just the input or whatever that I'm using on Discord, but I don't want to mess with it and then have to
don't fuck it, leave it alone.
Because we'll test it out for next week or something. But I know that they're because I'm not using the same input I was last week or the last few weeks, so that's a reason. And I don't have the perfect
I got you
settings.
at 200 in Discord, and you sound twice as loud on YouTube and Twitch than you do on Discord.
Yeah, because I have to add. Hold on, so I have a filter on it. It has a plus 13.9 decibel gain. So I'm literally it's 3/4 to the max that I can put it up to in OBS. So that's probably why.
Works for the stream. Good enough for me.
Alrighty. You might have to put in the notes or something when you just to remind me to retweet that tweet. If you remember or something and I don't. I'll pull up the tweet just in case. Let me mute all this shit. You ready to get started?
Is there?
Hello and welcome to episode 146 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking about the return, potentially, of one of the most iconic brands in Call of Duty esports history. We also have some HBR Classic to talk about, and a bunch of other Call of Duty League matches from the first week back after the minor. We are back into the qualifiers, the Major 1 qualifiers, almost to Major 1, the tournament itself. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Like you said, pretty action-packed weekend Call of Duty. Got some good matches, a little bit of drama, and a little bit of news to dissect, and I'm ready to get right into it.
Yeah, so I want to first start off. Bink and I were talking about this before the show, but I've been changing around some of the stuff on my mic. I noticed, and Bink said he noticed a buzz or some kind of feedback on the last episode, maybe a few episodes. So I'm trying to fix that. I am not by any means a genius. Well, I'm a genius in some ways, but not others. Microphones and audio, not my thing. So I'm trying to do my best. If there is any complaints or any critiques or whatever, please let me know. what you're hearing on your end. I'll try to listen back to it, but some people, depending on how they're listening or where they're listening, they might hear something different than I am. But hopefully it sounds okay. It looks okay. Sorry if it doesn't. So just wanted to kind of put a disclaimer out there before we get into this. The first and the biggest topic of the week, and no disrespect to the CDL matches and all the qualifiers and all the teams, but Hastro announced that he has reacquired the EnVyUs brand, as well as the brands of the Dallas Fuel, which was Envy's Overwatch League team, and the Dallas Empire brand, which was EnVyUs's Call of Duty League team. And I thought it was suspicious almost, because we had just talked about Hastro for whatever reason, like an episode or two ago. And I wasn't expecting this. I don't think anybody was, but I thought it was incredibly interesting. I actually sent you the tweet and you're like, yeah, that's pretty big. And, just the fact that, and for some reason, I had been thinking about Envy in general, like a week or two ago. And I was like, man, it really sucks that we have OpTic, we have FaZe, we have Thieves, but we don't have Envy. And Envy is like, right up there. Like, I mean, it's more important than the Thieves in the history of Call of Duty, of course. It's more important than FaZe in terms of competitive in the history of competitive in Call of Duty esports. So it's like OpTic and Envy are the two brands that I think I most associate with Call of Duty esports. And for a long time, or for the last few years, we didn't have anything with Envy because it went dormant with the Dallas Empire, with the CDL and all that. And then when the Empire and OpTic merged, then it just became OpTic Texas. And we lost the Empire, we lost Envy, and pretty much all of the connection that we had to that brand. And now it seems like at least somebody who really does care about it. And I think you could say a lot about Hastro, and he has done so much and done a lot in Call of Duty esports. But one thing that you have to say is that he really loves and cares for Team EnVyUs and the brand. And obviously as a co-founder, I think he was on the first competitive team way back when, and he was an executive in the organization for most of that time. He really cares about it, and I'm really happy to see him have control of this brand and hopefully do something with it. I want to get your thoughts though, because you've been a Call of Duty esports lifer basically a lot longer than I have, certainly. And EnVyUs was one of the OG Call of Duty teams. So I want to get your thoughts on how you felt about this when you saw that Hastro reacquired the Envy brand.
Yeah, I think you pose something that's the bigger, like the big picture topic around this is what does this mean for the future? So we'll get into that in a little bit. But immediate reaction to hearing this news, I was super excited. I also thought it was because we talked about Hastro in the last episode, doing the mentioning like the return to MLG pool play, like that sort of format thing. So I did think it was kind of um a funny coincidence that this happened after we talked about that. But yeah, nonetheless, I just think like Envy being back in Astros hands, along with the Dallas Fuel and Dallas Empire. Obviously, Dallas Fuel doesn't matter as much for COD fans, but Envy, no matter what way you look at it, is the bigger one. It's back in his hands, and um, it was kind of it's a couple years ago now that like the whole merger between Envy and OpTic went down. I don't really remember it. I probably should have looked up some of the old stories and reports around that time before we did the show, but I admittedly didn't. But as far as I remember it going down, it was basically like OpTic was separating from like the NRG. What's it, Andy Miller, I think.
Yes.
Like that spot was like in the quote unquote franchise, they were like separating from them. So like it was almost like the Dallas / Envy spot kind of swooped in, and Hastro almost like, like kind of reached out and saved OpTic, not to be dramatic or anything, but he
Yeah.
basically like gave them an olive branch almost, and just a chance to stay in competitive Call of Duty when there was a potential that they might not have. Regardless of how all that went down behind closed doors and whatnot, like that was just one of the unfortunate casualties of that deal. Everyone in competitive Call of Duty is obviously excited about OpTic uh, being able to stick around because of that deal. But Envy was just, and the Empire by extension, um, was the sacrifice almost to keep the green wall around in the capacity that COD fans wanted. And like you said, you can make the argument Envy's one of the most iconic brands in Call of Duty esports history. And I think the argument can be made that the Empire is one of the cooler um brands and logo team name combinations that was made when the whole CDL era started. I was a big fan of how they incorporated like the N and the V into the crown for the Empire and whatnot. So yeah, regardless, I just think being back in Hastro's hand is really cool. OpTic fans went through that whole thing for a while where like there was the fake OpTic, quote unquote, and it wasn't in Hex's hands, and then Hex finally reacquired OpTic, and everyone was super excited about it. And this is obviously similar in like description, and it might not just be as big picture for like most fans because a lot of people are just OpTic fans, but you know I have a ton of memories of Envy and Call of Duty, and I think it's awesome Astro has it back. But now looking ahead, where do we go from here? Like if Astro just has Envy and the Empire in his back pocket, and nothing happens after this, then it doesn't really affect competitive Call of Duty, right? But where does he go from here? Is he able to get back in the CDL with the Envy/Empire branding next year? My initial reaction would be that's what I hope is the angle. I mean, maybe for like this year he does something in Challengers and they have a Team Envy Challengers team, which would be cool just for the sake of having Envy in the name back in competitive Call of Duty. But then beyond that, I think the goal for next year for most like just generic COD fans is to have Team Envy somehow, some way back in Call of Duty. And I think even if the Empire was to somehow get into the league again, like just the Empire name, I would be shocked if it was Dallas again, just because of like OpTic technically owning that spot and being OpTic Texas. So I don't think it would work out. It would have to be another location if we're still doing that. Or they could just do something like the Tennessee Team Envy or Nashville Envy or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, that's where my head's at with all this. Happy for Astro, happy for all those involved with Envy, and happy for all the fans. I mean, obviously, a lot of good memories with Envy. I still one of my like not earliest, but one thing that I always remember and associate with Envy is when Nifty was very little and young. He was playing with like Ego on an Icons team, and he had like a CTF pull against Envy on standoff to upset them at some UMG event I was watching in Black Ops 2, and that was just nuts. And that was the first time I heard of Nifty. And obviously Nifty didn't stick around in COD, and he moved on to CSGO or CS2 or whatever, and Counter-Strike. But he was after that he played CS or CSGO for Envy in some capacity, I remember. So that was kind of interesting. And the first event I attended was COD Champs 2016. It was Black Ops 3, so I think that was 2016. We met at Champs in 2018, so 2017 would have been IW. Yeah, so 2016 COD Champs, and that's the one Envy won against Splice. So I have a lot of good memories with Envy, as do a lot of other people in the community. So this is just exciting news in general, and the big question is just where do they go from here? What is Hastro's next move? And how do we get Envy back in COD? Because I'm sure there are people equally excited as me at the thought of Envy actually returning to competitive COD.
The initial thought I have is the Boston breach and all the uncertainty around that brand and their organization from this past offseason. We don't really know what the future of the breach holds. they would, Envy or whatever organization would want to get involved in the CDL. I feel like that would be a natural fit or a place where they could go to get a spot if there isn't expansion, which, we talked about a few episodes ago, and the possibility or just the idea of expansion in the Call of Duty League. But, like you, I hope that Envy is in some shape or form involved in the Call of Duty esports space because, like I said at the top of the show, they're one of the most important organizations and teams to COD esports. Like that's not a debate whatsoever. And it has sucked that we haven't had them the last few seasons. I hope to have them in the future, and just to kind of go over some of the what happened with Envy, because you mentioned how it all kind of surrounds with like the CDL and OpTic in general. So the CDL starts, all of these brands have to create quote unquote new brands. For whatever reason, the CDL decided to separate it. So OpTic, the only team I think, so there was Atlanta FaZe, which you could say like they didn't really have to create a new brand except the logo. And the same thing, as far as I know, with OpTic LA, I don't like, that's the fake OpTic that Bink was referring to, because they were not owned by Hex and those guys. Yeah, because Hex at some point had sold OpTic to Immortals. I mean, I think quickly regretted it. But so OGLA was the original OpTic in the CDL era, and then I believe after the first season, that's when 100 Thieves bought in. They bought OGLA's spot. Immortals sold the OpTic brand back to Hex. The Chicago Huntsmen, which was Hex's team and Scump's team, they rebranded to OpTic Chicago, and I think they were that for maybe 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. And then, like you mentioned, they were owned by NRG Esports at that spot, and NRG decided to get out. They didn't want to be involved in the CDL anymore. That spot eventually got sold to the Boston Breach, if I'm not mistaken. But the brand, it was like
Demon Cats potential spot.
Yeah, but there was like real concern that they wouldn't be able to sell that spot at that time. So we were, there was a possibility, or it seemed that there was a possibility that we would have 11 teams for that CDL season. Eventually, the OpTic brand gets sold to Envy. I think Hastro was kind of at the forefront of doing that, like you mentioned. And then that spot was again sold to the Boston Breach. And then once they acquired that brand of OpTic, no matter how valuable and how important and historic Envy is as a brand, OpTic trumps that, because it is OpTic is the most popular team, the most popular brand, most popular organization, and one of the most popular organizations in all of esports. So then it becomes OpTic Texas. Dallas Empire brand dies. Obviously, Envy had been kind of shelved as in Call of Duty at least. And then I'm pretty sure just the entire organization went from Envy to OpTic, and everything got rebranded across all of their esports to OpTic. So just I'm really happy to see Envy at least alive, or seemingly alive. I don't know exactly what Hastro's plans are, but he loves esports. I'm sure he will get involved. And he's talked about Call of Duty esports quite a bit in the past and how much he cares for it. I think he was a commentator when I started watching, which feels weird, like the amount of commentators and the quality of commentators at that time, because you had Hastro and Fwiz together, if I'm not mistaken. And then Golden Boy was a commentator at the time. Obviously, Puckett was a commentator. I feel like Maven came around later, like during I want to say AW maybe. Like
he did Halo stuff, right?
Yeah, him and
Gandhi.
Yeah, him and Gandhi were Halo guys, and then when Halo kind of Maven made his way over here, and obviously Merc was way later because he was a player when I started watching. But so Hastro's been around forever. Like I mentioned, he was a player on the first Envy team. I guess if Carolina Royal Ravens, if they kind of go to the wayside, that would be a natural fit, because Envy was based in North Carolina for a time.
It's a good shout.
So there's something there at least. But yeah, I'm just excited to see it, and I think hopefully we'll see something from them at some point. Any last thoughts on the Envy stuff? I guess we should mention real quick that Hastro also, when he announced that he had reacquired these brands, he said that post transaction, I will not be a shareholder or associated with OpTic. My team will gain access to the social media accounts for the brands next week. So that's an important thing to note, because Hastro at some point was the CEO, if I'm not mistaken, of Envy, and maybe even when they bought OpTic. And he's been doing something else. Like, he hasn't really been involved in esports in a little bit. So I don't know, like that. I don't know what happens with like the OpTic organization, if that changes anything on their end. But I did think that was important to know. Any last thoughts for you on this stuff?
No, yeah, I did want to bring that up, so I'm glad you did. But I don't think it'll change anything for OpTic, really. I feel like he was in more of an advisory role, or kind of just like in the background, it felt like, since like the merger, and at least since like um the first couple of months after the merger took place. I think like he like did like a chief gaming officer or some position
Yeah.
like that. I don't remember the exact acronym for it or whatever, but it was something like that, where he was basically like, taking a step back from day-to-day operations and whatnot. And then he was kind of, like you said, just not in the picture much in recent years. So um yeah, I think it's important to note, no longer associated with OpTic. I think that opens the door to getting Envy back in the CDL, and that's what I would really like. I think, end of the day, I do like the Empire brand. And if the Empire brand is what has to return for whatever, legal reasons or whatever, then that'd be cool with me. But um, especially in a time like you said, now we got OpTic, we got Phase, we got the Thieves, we got Cloud9. Like, we have some iconic esports names in the CDL. I would, whatever way we can, you know, finagle to get Envy or Team EnVyUs, or just, something Envy related into the CDL with that actual Envy name. Um, that's what I would like to see for next season and beyond.
And I think it should be noted that because the Dallas Empire won the first CDL championship, it's important for at least the history of Call of Duty that at least that brand is not just dead and buried, or I guess it could be, but somebody else has like control of that. Because I'm trying to think of, like, obviously we don't have the New York Subliners anymore. That brand is kind of dead. And we'll see what happens with some of these other teams and what they do with like Atlanta Phase, if we don't have like the geographic locations anymore, if that goes away or whatever. But I think it's at least cool that the Empire can be alive in some shape or form. Shout out Oli or Yoda. Um,
But I mean, like, Cloud9. No, nobody's calling them Cloud9 New York, even though they actually have that name, right? So we could literally have like Envy New York, or something similar to that, and I think everyone would just call them Envy, and that would be cool.
yeah, don't get me started on this stuff. I'll go another hour. Let's get into these matches though, because we were just talking about Cloud9. I don't know if we should be calling them Cloud9 or something else, because Cloud9 doesn't seem, it seems a little too respectful, I would say, for the way that they played this weekend. They started off with a 3-0 loss to the Los Angeles Gorillas Gentle Mates. They got 3-0. Excuse me. Thank you. They lost 3-0 to LAG, who hadn't won a single match to this point, which I will say I was ahead of the curve a little bit. I didn't pick LAG, but I was signaling that they would, eventually win, and they looked pretty good. Some kind of close matches, but what did you think overall of this result? Is this just another case, or we'll talk about C9's second match as well, but are these cases of C9's internet or online issues, or is it just this team isn't as good as we thought they would be?
I didn't see anything on the timeline about internet stuff. I could have missed it, but I didn't see it, and I saw it in the past when it was a thing for Cloud9. So, um, not entirely sure if that was the case here, but I do think the bigger thing, I was pretty locked in on the Slasher versus Snoopy, Carolina versus Boston revenge match uh, for this weekend. And I think last show I forgot to mention this really was a revenge match for a majority of the Gentlemates, especially Skies and Kismet, but Priesta to a lesser degree, but mostly Skies and Kismet because they're literally playing against Sib, who was their teammate last year on the org that they won a world championship on with, and they represented for the last 2 years. And I certainly forgot about that aspect of this match.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm going to attribute the loss to here. But on a more serious note, the one thing that really stood out to me, and it's going to be my talking point for both of the Gentlemates matches this week, is we saw them play Skyline Hardpoint twice, and on both maps, Priesta played pretty well. And it wasn't there were still some cases of him using the second AR for Gentlemates, but I did see several hills and occasions where he was running a third SMG on that map. And if that's what it takes to unlock Priesta and help him, you know, take his game to what we know he's capable of, then I think Skyline Hardpoint could be something that we see a lot more of out of this Gentlemates team. At the same time, if I'm able to notice this, there's a good chance other teams are able to notice it, and they might be, targeting it and be like, if we're not good at Skyline, we're just going to veto it against Gentlemates, and then Gentlemates has to go back to square one. But at least for the time being, like if seeing Priesta play with a third SMG, and if that's gonna help him play better, I think that could be something to keep an eye on for this team. We just know historically the type of player Priesta is. I mean, even going back to like that Atlanta or the FaZe Clan team in Black Ops 4, where they didn't qualify for the pro league or whatever. There was like that pro league qualifier where he went from running a Maddox to running the grapple sog slash grav slam sog to ICR in like the span of one tournament. And then obviously he goes to 100 Thieves and has a really good year after that. But like we just know historically, Priest is able to, he's like a true definition of a flex player in my eyes, because like he can do it with whatever gun you put in his hands, but it's really a game by game basis of what his best gun is. Whether it's an SMG and an AR, I feel like that changes and isn't always the same. Um, so it could just be a case here where he's better with an SMG in this game, and that could be something to keep an eye on. So that's what really stood out to me in this match. It helped. It was obviously the first match and first map of the first match, and that's what Gentlemates were able to win. But they took a search after that 6-4, and then they reverse swept the control. So yeah, pretty surprised that Cloud9 lost 3-0 in this game, but we both were kind of, speculating, and we've been talking about Vegas eventually getting a win, and I don't think we necessarily said it the same for Gentlemates, but it's like they're not going to be winless forever. So a lot of those fans, obviously early on this year, we've seen support from the Gentlemates fans and the French community rallying behind the squad in some tough matches and some tough losses. So for them to get that first win and get the monkey off their back, they got to be excited about that.
Yeah, just a big win for their confidence, I'm sure, because they definitely weren't expecting to start 0-4 and to lose at the minor the way they did. So getting that win should be pretty big for them. And Cloud9, what is there to say? They've looked pretty lackluster. Of course, we haven't gotten to land, so if anybody wants to chalk it up to this is just online, it's going to be different when we get to the major, we're going to see. But the way things are going, they might only have one match to prove themselves at a major, which is not a good position to put themselves in. And there's really not much they can do about that except try to win maybe one or two more matches online before they get to Spain. You just mentioned Vegas a moment ago. They lose 3-1 to OpTic on Friday. They win the search, so that's interesting. Of course, this was a rematch of the minor first round series where Xnid went off and they somehow still lost despite him dropping 52 kills. They lose the opening hard point. They win the search, and then they lose the control and the second hard point. I think it's still pretty close. Like it's not like a blowout or by any means. The second hard point was pretty convincing. The first hard point was like 81 points, which is kind of like your average run of the mill hard points. But for the fact that this is a new CDL team with half of their academy team playing against OpTic, who we would assume is one of the best teams, and we just witnessed like 2 hours ago beating who we thought was the best team. I don't really know what to say, but hats off to Vegas, I guess. Like we're just like this series or this season of moral victories for the Vegas Falcons on this podcast. But I expected OpTic to win. They won. Vegas looked better than I thought. Is that about the same from you?
Yeah, I mean it's really, I mean there's no other really way to talk about Vegas in my eyes at this point. Like we've kind of, it's hard to be overcritical of a team that just doesn't have the reps against the top talent in Call of Duty. For so like, if Vegas, as we've talked about on the podcast before, we don't know what the future holds. It seems like they're committed to the all Saudi Arabian roster project. Um, if we're in like a couple years down the road of Vegas Falcons continuing to be a team that's just getting stomped regularly, then maybe I'll start to be more critical. But I'm not at that point yet. Like they're still they're gonna have growing pains. They got a lot to learn, but there still are flashes in there, and obviously like the Extend 52 bomb against OpTic in the minor, like that's one of them. That I'll be talking a little bit more in Vegas's second match here, but um overall, I mean, yeah, they took a search like that seems to be they and for all of their you know lack of success in the respawns, they've been competitive in search, even if they aren't winning searches for the most part, I feel like. And they even had a 2-1 lead in this control against OpTic. So, like, again, this wasn't a like 3-0 20-minute series. Like, sure, Vegas lost, but they made OpTic work for it, as we saw at the minor, which the minor match was actually, a 3-0 as opposed to Vegas stealing the search here and making OpTic work for it a little bit more. But yeah, end of the day, expected result here with OpTic taking them down again. And Hook in particular, I feel like he's going to be a talking point for me as we talk about OpTic. He just really played well this weekend overall, but some of his stat lines were like even beyond playing well. Like he went 39 and 18 in uh map one, and just like that combination. I know there's like scoregami and stuff and for NFL scores and stuff. I feel like 39 kills and 18 deaths is like just an absurd combination because that's over a 2 KD. And you don't see that every day. So you see some guys go like 30 and 25 and stuff, and I feel like that's like a common uh amount of deaths because it's a little bit closer to a 1 KD, right? For so 25 is like a little more common number of deaths to have when you have 30 kills, but 39-18 is just ludicrous. So Hook was definitely in nuke form this weekend. This was just one example of that. But yeah, overall, Vegas put up a fight. Wasn't enough to get that first win, but we saw Gentlemates get that first win. Could be on the horizon here for Falcons, but they still got some work to do.
Yeah, and I think Hook is going to be in a weird position because once the major comes around, if he has lackluster performances, then people will point to that and kind of forget
Yep.
a match like today. And granted, I guess if you're not playing well against FaZe and Thieves and so on and so forth, but you play well against Vegas, it doesn't really matter all that much. But still, it feels like kind of something that happened with Pred last season. Near the end of the regular season, where he wasn't having his best games, and OpTic wasn't doing so well, and fans started to turn on him a little bit. And I think Hook is in a he's in a dangerous spot because he can be a scapegoat if OpTic doesn't succeed like people want them to. And I think that's fair or unfair. That's just kind of the position he's in. So it's good to see him back and frying like this. at this point, especially with how this beginning of the season has been up and down with all with the change with OpTic and everything in the CDL. Next up, we had Minnesota versus Toronto, another rematch of the minor. Minnesota came out with a win in that one, which was a major upset. Toronto had come in undefeated after those first 2 qualifying weeks. And then Toronto comes in today, or on Friday, excuse me, and they win 3-2. They end up winning 6-0 on Protocol S&D to win Game 5 to now remain undefeated in the qualifiers, hand Minnesota. Unfortunately, another loss. I had mentioned it on the last episode, but the minor stuff, those points come in handy at the end of the season, not so much in Major 1 qualifying standings. And now I believe they've lost, at this point, they had lost 3 matches in a row in the qualifiers, which, if that trend continued, then obviously they would not be in a good position to start in the winner's bracket at Major 1. What do you think of this series overall? A pretty back and forth series, some kind of blowouts and lopsided wins for each team, but a 3-2 win nonetheless for Toronto.
Yeah, this was the match I said last episode. I was really excited for this one. I mentioned like some of the connection issues and the resets and delays during the minor showdown between them to kind of, in my eyes, played a factor in the reverse sweep. Not to take away any credit from Minnesota, but kind of felt like Toronto got iced a little bit and was, when they're the team with the momentum and then they're winning in a map for, there's a reset and they lose their lead in that map and then they lose that map and then there's a delay before the map 5. Just felt like some stuff was working against them. But doesn't matter at this point. Now they get their revenge here in a qualifier match for the actual major, which it's 10 points for winning that match either way, whether they won the minor, but this is 10 points for this for Major 1 as opposed to the season overall. So this is advantage earlier for Toronto in that regard. But interesting thing, I know I mentioned last episode how Toronto up to that point were 7-0 after they won the map 2 S&D against Minnesota. They lose the Hacienda Search and Destroy in Game 5 of the minor to Minnesota, and Hacienda Search and Destroy is the Game 2 this time around. So Minnesota loses that, and then they play the Protocol S&D, which was the Game 2 in the minor match, and they win that 6-0, as you said. They won it 6-1 in the minor, which means Toronto has won 12-1 round count on Protocol S&D against Minnesota in those 2 matches, which is kind of impressive. And now I believe Toronto is 4-0 on Protocol S&D, so it might be something teams look to veto against them going forward. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, this was a really awesome match. Definitely lived up to my expectations for what I was expecting. So long story short there too, what I was getting at overall is that up to this point, I believe now Toronto would be 8-2 in Search and Destroy, and their only 2 losses in Search and Destroy are on Hacienda, which is the newest map added to the map pool, and it's 2 Hacienda Search and Destroy losses to Minnesota. So they're undefeated on every other S&D map against every other team. So I think that illustrates how dangerous this team can be in Search and Destroy. In the map 1 in the series, Joe Thieves and Beans, the 2 new players on the team, we had our questions about them joining the team, replacing guys like Scrap and Envoy. They both dropped 35 kills to lead this squad in the map 1, so good signs there. Kleenex plays well in the Protocol Control, which was a 3-2 where Toronto wins in a round 5 offense. And then I was impressed in the Game 4. Minnesota was down late, 230 to 205, and they basically just held the 4th hardpoint P4 there for 45 seconds straight, kept Toronto out to force the Game 5, but obviously we know Game 5 was just all Toronto from that point. So really, another back and forth showdown, another Game 5 for a Minnesota squad. A lot of people had low expectations for. I feel like going into the season, they're proving those people wrong and showing what they're capable of. It's just been tough sledding in terms of getting that final result. In some cases, outside of those reverse sweeps, obviously they pulled off in the minor, but another strong showing from Toronto. I just I was really excited about this match, like I said, and it definitely lived up to the bill for me.
Yeah. Before we move on, I just want to shout out Fallen in the YouTube chat. He said you guys just popped up on my homepage, dropped a sub. Good luck on your stream. So appreciate that from him. Moving on to Saturday, January 18th. I don't really think we need to discuss Vancouver versus Vegas much. I think there's really nothing new we can say about any of these Vegas matches. And especially with this one, it was kind of a similar result to the first match of the weekend, where they win the S&D, they lose the 3 respawns. Any surprises or anything that stood out to you in this match?
No, so I mean Vegas went 2-0 in search this weekend, so I guess in terms of small victories, you definitely take that if you're Vegas in my eyes. Like 0-6 in the respawns, but 2-0 in the search. I mean, it's better than 0-6 map count overall, right? But the one thing I put down in the notes here, especially Xnid dropped 38 on Vault Hardpoint against Vancouver, which is the same map. Obviously, he dropped the 52 on against OpTic, so that's another good showing for him on a map that apparently is going to be one of the maps we see a lot of these high kill counts on throughout the season. So something to keep an eye on there. But the 38 and 33 performance out of him just wasn't enough against Vancouver, and then he followed it up going 12-5 in the red card search and destroy, that which Vegas won 6-4. And my thought process immediately, we had this discussion very early on in the season that there are limited options for rookie of the year heading into the season, unless somebody gets picked up like after Major 1 or something like that. But I feel like as of now, Xnid's got to be the early front runner for rookie of the year. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but outside of that, yeah, there's nothing much. I think this was a match for Vancouver, especially just one that they, had to win basically, and they were able to take care of business in the respawns. Still a squad that I want to see more of this out of the Surge in general, but yeah, that's where my head's at with this one.
Yeah, I don't have anything for the rookie of the year thing. I think maybe Kicks would have had a chance, obviously for Vegas as well, but we don't know how long he'll be out, and that was kind of a factor I had
Yeah.
in last year's rookie of the year. If you come in like halfway through the season, or you only play a portion of the season, you better be like the best player in the league basically, to make up for lost time. So maybe Kicks can come back, and then if he can make up some of that and edge out someone like Xnid. But yeah, I think just simply from the lack of options for rookie of the year, and the fact that he has looked pretty good, then Xnid I think has to be the front runner. Maybe like someone like Ringcore. Maybe I just don't really.
I mean,
know.
those are the options are Rencor and the Vegas Falcons players.
Yeah. So like there's there's not much there, and so yeah, I would probably say Xnet is the front runner at this point in time. Speaking of Ringcore and yeah, certainly Ringcore in Miami, they played on Saturday as well. They played C9 New York. We kind of tipped our hand a little bit earlier in the episode, talking about how Cloud9 did not have a good weekend whatsoever. It culminated with this one. They lose 3-2. They were up 2-1 in this series after sweeping the Hacienda Control. Then they lose Vault Hardpoint and lose Hacienda S&D. Just not great, I would say, if you're a Cloud9 fan. Obviously, this is a huge blow to them, but a huge win for Miami, who had lost a few of these Game 5s, been on the wrong end of them, but they come out and they win this one. We kind of talked about C9 more during that first match. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, but I certainly think we should discuss a little bit about Miami, and maybe this their ceiling is maybe a little bit higher than maybe we previously thought. Or maybe C9's ceiling is just a lot lower than we thought. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like this is, I think heading into the season, we probably both had Cloud9 a little bit higher than Miami, but I think both of those teams were in the middle of the pack range. Like, if I have to put numbers to it, I feel like it was like Cloud9 was 5th or 6th, and Miami was probably like 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. So it's not like this is like a 1 versus 12 showdown in terms of like numbers / power rankings, however you want to phrase it. So I think not surprised that the match was particularly close. I think the most surprising thing to me was that um, before this, Miami was apparently 1-7 in search and destroys early in the season. Obviously, small sample size. They had a couple Game 5 losses, I believe.
Yeah, like 3 in a row, I think.
Yeah, so they win 2 search and destroys against Cloud9 uh, when they previously had a 1-7 record in the mode. And we talked earlier this season when the news actually happened that Cloud9 was signing Tupac, who was the S&D coach from FaZe. We talked about how Attach went like a ridiculous amount of time with Vegas Legion last year without winning an S&D on LAN, and we're saying like the combination of Attach's past success in S&D plus some of these players on the team plus adding Tupac, like Cloud9 should be a good S&D team. But if they're struggling a bit here in search and losing to a team that was previously 1-7 in the mode, that's raising my eyebrows a little bit. I'm not, not a major red flag to me and not like full panic button
It's like a
mode,
yellow
but
flag.
yeah, it's definitely like, it's got my attention now. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye on that going forward. Tupac had some choice words in a tweet after the match that I'm not going to repeat, but if you guys want to see what Tupac said, you can check his replies on Twitter. But other than that, yeah, there was a funny interaction in the map one where Mac literally watched Lucky spawn in on Skyline, and I think that might be some of like the I think there was some chatter around like the rewind Hacienda map pool changes about like Skyline potentially being replaced in the map pool. And like if you're like, I literally saw it and I was like, what the hell is this? Like Mac was shooting somebody else and 6 feet to the right saw the other Miami player spawn in. It was the freest tube piece of his life. So like if that's happening on that map, that might be something that we have to see change map pool wise going forward. But I thought that was a funny interaction in that game two, search and destroy. The first one, Miami wins medals, goes 12-4, had a massive 1v3 to seal the deal in that round 9. So that was a cool play. And then as you mentioned, Rancor kind of popped off with 39 and 25 on Vault Hardpoint. Once again, another Vault Hardpoint where a lot of kills are being dropped by individuals. So that's exciting for the number watchers like me out there.
I can only imagine what curse words Lucky said in Spanish when he spawned in and immediately died. There's just no, I mean, it's happened to everybody before playing competitive, but especially in a CDL match to have it happen, it would be pretty tilting.
That's where my head went. Like I've played enough pubs in my life too. I have seen people spawn in front of me on like Shipment or like, Dome was one of my favorite maps, and COD World at War, not the Dome version in MW3. That was a little bigger than that. But there are those historic, even Rust, there are those historic small maps for pubs where you get spawn killed and you see other people and you spawn kill them, but you don't see it very often in a competitive match like what happened in this map one here. So that's definitely something that is we're going to have to see if any more instances like that happen throughout the season. And if they do, we might have to see if Skyline is on the chopping block, at least from a hardpoint perspective, potentially.
And then we got the last match on Saturday. I think this was the main event of the weekend. I don't care whatever happened after that. But, Saturday night was the time for fighting. And that was, it was kind of like the Ollie Foreman, Tyson Holyfield of our generation. Snoopy versus Slasher, Boston versus Carolina. Obviously, we've talked about quite a bit the relationship between Snoopy and Slasher and how it broke down very quickly and very publicly last season when Slasher was a part of the Boston Breach. I would say they're probably not good friends if I'm just going to go out on a limb there. And this was their first meeting in the CDL. Since then, Slasher didn't play the rest of the season last season. And Snoopy, was wowing away on the Boston Breach, winning like whatever it was, 5 or 6 matches that entire season. They finally meet on Saturday. You picked Carolina, I picked Boston. I think we were both kind of rubbing our hands together, waiting for this one. And My boy Snoopy, he did not disappoint whatsoever. The Breach end up winning this series 3-1. Snoopy has some pretty good games. Purge, who got slandered on the TL so much early last season when he was a part of the Vegas Legion, and he got dropped and everything. He goes 45-20 in the second hard point to close out the series. Slasher did not have a good series whatsoever. Your thoughts? Are you ready to apologize for taking Slasher's side in this beef?
I'm not going to go that far. I will say I was definitely disappointed by the end result. I was hyping it up on the podcast last week, and I said I was expecting Slasher to drop a 1.8 and just go, raised earth or what. That's not the right thing.
It was more like a 0.8, not a 1.8.
Yeah, he definitely did not have a, like I don't know why it sticks in my head, but I just remember last year, Major 1, he had that 1.4 and one map at Major 1, and him and Ghosty like had the highest KDs for the event because they only played one series in the loser bracket and then they lost. But nonetheless, I just overall, yeah, I thought this was Slasher's chance to, show everybody that, his way is the right way, and just that was a weird way of putting it, but this was Slasher's chance to get his revenge for that whole situation last year with Snoopy in Boston, and he wasn't able to do it. And obviously, it's an online match. We might see this showdown again on LAN. I hope we do. Maybe that'll bring out the best because we know Slasher's a great LAN player, and that's where he really thrives. But even I know Miles and Chance, or maybe it was just Miles. They were both even saying during the broadcast, like at some points it felt like Slasher was dying in 2 bullets, or I believe Miles' exact words, like it feels like he's playing with himself because it just felt like he was getting eviscerated in some of these gunfights. But I do think the big picture thing here was I think it was Nameless on the desk talking about Carolina's hard point as of late. Just not looking as strong as when they initially were having success. I know, again, small sample size in the grand scheme of things. But that was at least a talking point out of the desk on the CDL broadcast, and that showed up in this series. They lose 2 hard points to Boston. As you mentioned, the Purge masterclass performance, 45-20. I saw a clip from Zuma. He was either on the flank or his watch party. He was basically like just raising the question: is this one of the greatest single map performances in Call of Duty esports history? Because this is, again, like we were talking about the Hook 39-18 earlier this weekend, like 45-20. That's over a 2 KD again. Like that's just that's got to be another score Agami or stat line Agami for COD esports. Because I can't think of any other 45-20 performances. So that was just a really strong showing out of Purge there. But overall, yeah, Carolina is able to win the search, but Boston took care of business in the respawns, and mostly highlighted by that dominant showing in the vault hardpoint. Again, another vault hardpoint where someone's dropping 40 plus kills. So yeah, I guess round 1 of the Snoopy versus Slasher beef / rivalry in 2025 goes to Snoopy. We'll have to see what happens in round 2.
Yeah, and I think it should be noted also, this is Carolina's first loss in the Major 1 qualifiers. Obviously, they lost in the minor, but they had gotten to the grand finals of that minor. They had looked pretty good. They had beaten OpTic. So for Boston, I just gotta say, like, Boston has looked incredible especially for what we expected of them to this point in the season. They've already won 4 matches, so they're like, I don't know, like halfway to their season total from last year. And we're only 3 weeks into the season. Right now, they're tied for 3rd in the CDL with Carolina and LAT. So I'm not sure how that tiebreaker ends up working out, but they're in a really good spot, and they're just looking so much better than I think anybody could have or would have anticipated. And hats off to them. They're doing a great job. Then you get Sunday, January 19th, the last 3 matches of this week of the qualifiers. First up, Toronto versus LAG. You know, not a great showing for the Gentlemates. Not the worst either. Toronto is a pretty good team. Toronto definitely looked better than their matchup against Minnesota. They closed this one out in 4 maps instead of 5. They have a really back and forth or really contested second hard point, game 4 to close out this series. And they go 2-0 on this week. And I believe they are now 5-1, or no, excuse me, they're 6-0 on the in the qualifiers. So they're in kind of the driver's seat to be the number 1 seed for the Major 1 seeding stuff. So what did you think of this match?
Yeah, I think again another vault hardpoint here in map 1 where we just have a takeover performance. This time Joe DeCease 40 and 21, which is obviously just under a 2 KD for the map. Follows that up by another dominant S&D win. So this is a 6-1 S&D win on vault, which comes after the 6-0 protocol win in game 5 against Minnesota. So outside of the map 2, their last 2 S&D maps, they've only lost 1 round, which is, just pretty impressive. Speaks volumes again to just Toronto as an S&D team got to be considered the best S&D team in the game right now in my eyes, and I don't think that's even debatable. And I'm saying that without even I think now they're 8-2 in the mode. Like I said, the 2 losses would be on Hacienda to Minnesota, undefeated on every other map and against every other team. And again, small sample size, so we'll see where it goes from there. But early going, I think they're looking like a contender for strongest S&D team in the game at this point. And then Gentlemates fight back. They take the control, and it gets to that Skyline hardpoint, which, just like a half hour ish ago, was talking about Skyline hardpoint for this Gentlemate squad potentially being a key. And it's a closer map than the map 1. Only a 22-point loss for Gentlemates, but it's another map. Priesta went 31 and 27 with that third SMG at times. Just Beans dropped 40 kills, and Kleenex went 33 and 28. So outshined a little bit there in the slaying department. But I think grand scheme of things, it'll be interesting to see how much more out of this Skyline hardpoint we see from Gentlemates. I can see, just based on how they played it this weekend, even though they got the loss here, they won it earlier in the weekend, and it was close in this Toronto showdown. I feel like if other teams aren't going to veto it, I feel like that's going to be something we see this Gentlemate squad play, at least while it's working for them early on right now. So, Toronto 6-0 heading into Major 1. They got to have winner's bracket locked up, and they got to be in a good position to have one of the top seeds. And we'll have to see. I'm pretty sure I remember who their match is next week. I don't want to spoil it. I think it'll be a good one though, if I remember correctly. They got 6 wins right now, and they only play 7 qualifiers. All the teams do, I believe. So they only have 1 match next week. I'm pretty sure it's against OpTic. So that should be a good one next week, and we'll obviously talk about that next episode. So I'm not going to harp on it too much here, but overall, very strong weekend out of Toronto. 2 exciting matches. And looking forward to seeing more out of this squad. I think very highly of.
Like you said, with Toronto and how good they are in S&D, this is according to Breaking Point. I don't know if they've updated this, if this is up to date as of when we're recording, but they're first in S&D win percentage with an 82% win percentage. Only one other team it has won over 57% of their S&Ds, and that's Carolina. They have the highest S&D KD, highest round plus minus round wins. So it's not debatable at this point in time. Maybe that will change. Maybe the matchups will get a lot harder for them as you get into the major and all that. But to this point, they have proven that they're the best S&D team, and that, like you have said, probably 150 times on the show, S&D wins championships. And if they're going to be this good going into the major, that definitely bodes well for Toronto. The next match on Sunday was the match that it should have ended the day. I'm not sure exactly why it didn't, but it would have been the banger to end all bangers. LAT versus OpTic, the HBR Classic, as we like to refer to it. The first map, not a banger, but certainly something that you have to see to believe. OpTic wins 250 to 96 on Hasi and the hard point. Old Scrappy Doo was not looking great. 6 and 19. He had 774 damage in a hard point map, which is, I believe, I saw you tweet, I believe it was at Easy Mac, and it was like the worst damage or the lowest damage in the CDL this season, if I'm not mistaken, possibly of all time.
And so that's what I saw Easy Mac reply to somebody else, and obviously there have been CODs in the CDL era where your player has 100 health, and CODs where you've had 150 health. So the games where you only have 100 health, if you only drop 6 kills in that, like it's probably under, or it's going to be around 600 or something like that, and that would be if you only you're shooting at those 6 kills. But um regardless, the difference in the just starting health of your players is going to have an impact on how much damage you can deal, because if you're getting more kills with players who have more health, obviously that means you're dealing more damage. But the broadcast did tweet before map 4 in this HBR Classic that the 774 damage from Scrappy in map 1 is the lowest damage in a single hard point, and he is the only player to do under 1,000 damage in CDL history. That has to be in a hard point, by the way, because obviously there's donuts and 1 kill, 2 kill performances in S&D where those people probably did less than 1,000 damage. But regardless, this was a historically bad performance, and in this map 1, just no other way to put it. Like, obviously Scrap's a great player and MVP caliber player for his 2 years in the league so far. Rookie of the year is first, and all-star both years, I believe. So we think highly of him, and he is a good player undoubtedly. But even the best guys have bad maps nowadays. It's just unfortunate for CDL fans and LA Thieves fans or 100 Thieves fans, I guess, that his worst map potentially of his career came in a quote unquote rivalry match against OpTic.
Yeah, I wonder if he didn't play enough. He got off the game, and I don't know. Nate Shot needs to be checking.
I wanted to check his Twitter. I don't even know if he
might have deactivated. There's no way that he can come back from this. Losing to OpTic, he's got to be so beside himself. Did he tweet?
So he tweeted just generically after the map, wow, GG's OpTic lost 3-2. Need to fix our HPs. We'll get into that in a second. The CDL tweeted the new record with like the grinning emoji of that graphic with the stat I just read about, the 774 damage and the only player under 1,000 damage. Scrappy replied to that sheesh with like 5 or 6 E's, frying. And then he tweeted map 1, 6 kills, 750 damage, 10 miles ran. And this account, I've seen this account before, CDL Hater Central, tweeted an utter Aster class, we are proud, and he just replied with like the crying tears emoji. So he seems to, obviously he doesn't want to have performances like that, but it's in the past now, and he seems to at least be having a little fun and joking with it. But nonetheless, his more serious tweet out of those three, the first one just saying need to fix our HPs. I think that's the big takeaway here. Really, they lost both hard points in this HBR Classic against OpTic, and obviously the first one's a 100-point club. Nothing you can really do about that. Like, that's just you wipe that and go back to the drawing board on that. Again, it's a Hacienda 2, which is a new map for both squads. I thought it was interesting, at least, that the map 2, red card, search and destroy, LA Thieves win 6-3 and Scrappy goes 12-6. We'll get to the game 5. I'm pretty sure he went 12-9. I'm pretty sure he had 12 kills again in the game 5. So he had twice as many kills in both searches as he did in the map 1 hard point, if I remember correctly. But there was a weird 1v1/1v2 that Scrappy had early in the red card S&D where it was a 1v2. He gets the first kill and it's a 1v1 against Dashy, and like he runs through a door and Dashy's like coming at him and he's almost in his face, and like Scrap goes for a melee with his gun out, but it wasn't close enough to even connect with Dashy. Like Dashy was close to him, but not that close. And so he gets that animation, Dashy shooting at him, and then Scrap recovers from that and is still able to get the kill. It was just a really trolly 1v1 gunfight that was funny. If you guys didn't see that, CDL Twitter account tweeted out that. So that's something to check out if you missed it. Um, but yeah, overall, I mean, the at least in the slaying department, like Hook had some really strong performances in this again. He went 22-9 in the map one, which again is just a weird scoreline to think about, especially he started 1-3. So after starting 1-3, he went 21-6, which is over a 3 KD for the rest of the map, which is just absurd. That's Hook the Nuke status if I've ever seen it. Shots he drops 30 in the control. Hook drops 27, and that's more than anyone on LAT, despite LAT winning that control. And then Hook and Envoy both dropped 37 on the Scarline hard point. Shotzi right behind them at 36. And we get to the game 5. LAT take a 5-1 lead in the game 5 and choke it away. Lose 5 straight rounds and lose a 1v2 situation to Kylo Ken, former LA Thieves world champion. Is kind of like just Kenny was in one of the top hallways there on Hacienda. He was pre-aiming exactly where the two Thieves players came from. He actually got up for a second and went to like relocate, it looked like. And it was like he like got up right as the first player came around the corner, and it was like if that COD timing was just a slight second off in either direction, it could have went the other way. But he got that first kill. Then he like kind of was able to duck down, pop back up, and get the kill on the second guy. It wasn't a full-on snake. We did have some snaking drama in the Skyline hardpoint. We'll get to that in a second. But overall, this was definitely an HBR classic that lived up to expectations. Heartbreaking one for 100 Thieves and LA Thieves fans, especially when you're up 5-1 in a game 5. Like you just expect them to close that out. But yeah, definitely an interesting match, and one I expect we see these teams square off multiple times throughout the season. If this is what we're in for, every time this season, sign me up for more of that.
Yeah, these are two of the best teams, and the more that we can see of these teams playing each other, the better. And I mean, they made the most of it, at least in this time around. And I think both of the teams probably can walk away from this match and think that they can do better, and they didn't play nearly at their best. LAT, especially in this case, there's no way that they should have lost the S&D, so they shouldn't have lost, or the second S&D meaning, they shouldn't have lost the actual map. Like you have a 2v1 advantage. You have to win. And no disrespect to Kenny, but that's just any player, any situation. It's definitely in your favor to have that advantage and to lose. And just obviously they pretty much forfeited the first map of this series. Like they didn't show up at all. Like when your best player, the guy who is like an MVP candidate every year, when he drops 6 kills and then he drops 12 in each of the searches, like something went wrong, and that map is just a wash. So it basically was a 4-map series for LAT, and unfortunately they didn't pull out that last round of Hacienda S&D, and that kind of cost them. And I'm sure LAT fans will not forget Dashy snaking in that Skyline hardpoint that they won. What can you say though? Like that we've talked about it so many times that everybody says they won't snake, but then when it's nut crunching time, so to speak, people are going to snake. It's just kind of a natural reaction sometimes to what's happening in the game. And Dashy was the perpetrator, I guess you could call him in this case. And we'll see if there's any punishment. I believe it was Sib was going to get slammed with like a blacklisting, like Cloud9 New York was going to get blacklisted. And that was the proposed punishment for Sib. Will they do that to OpTic? I kind of think they won't, but we'll see what happens.
So that's what the discussion on the flank was. I tuned in after the matches today for a little bit to see what they were talking about in this, and because they were going back and forth on whether it was snaking, whether it wasn't, and all that yada yada. Consensus seemed to be that it was snaking from those guys, especially because it seemed like it was like three motions of like the sprint prone, sprint prone, sprint prone. Um, but they said that especially Ben was pretty animated just about like having the consistency in these punishments if they're going to dole out punishments for breaking GAs. And I think the what they said was that it ended up being a 1 day scrim blacklist for C9 for the Sib incident, and like Octane and Aches were like, "Oh, we get a day off of work basically. If you're telling me if we snake out, like screw that, like, that's fine by me." So they were kind of joking about it, but they were saying the same thing. Like they don't think that the pros are gonna be punishing OpTic for this, or they just don't think the pros are gonna remain consistent with the punishments, and they think that's the bigger issue in the grand scheme of things. So that's something we will want to keep an eye on, especially if it leads to any more drama or anything like that in the timeline, which I'm sure it inevitably will, if not in this situation, but in other situations going forward. But I did think it was funny that Dashi is having some fun with it, and he tweeted out after the match his stream link with the tweet, either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, the classic Dark Knight quote with the image of the Celium's top half of his head and the snake in the Atlanta Phase HQ or whatever facility. So I got a good laugh out of that tweet, regardless of what happens with the snaking. Well, that's not for us. Well, we can at least bring it up and laugh about it, talk about it, but we're not going to have any say on whether OpTic misses a day of scrims or 3 days of scrims or whatever the punishment will be. Um, and then another more hilarious news: Nadeshot brought back an iconic tweet after the loss, which obviously you were pretty vocal on your thoughts about Nadeshot's tweet after their last loss at the minor. This one was just the one where he's like, it looks like he's smiling, but then you look in the mirror in the background, he's got a fake gun to his head as he's taking the selfie. It's 100 Thieves Esports is back, baby. So that was a funny one. And then there was another clip posted of him streaming. He was like playing Marvel Rivals and like tuned in to just the clip of Kenny getting the 1v2, and he like was like, had a little bit of a meltdown and basically was saying like, just
The boys aren't playing hard enough.
Didn't say that, but it was the sort of animated response you'd expect when you're an esports org owner and you watch your team choke a 5-1 lead in a 1v2 in round 11.
Yeah, I mean, he should get used to it. Like, it's not this LAT group in particular, but I mean, it happens. It happened to Nade quite a bit in his career.
Well, there was another clip. It wasn't that one that I was trying to watch it quick here, so I don't know where I saw this. Maybe it was on the flank they brought it up. But someone was like, yeah, you choked a 5-1 lead or whatever. And Nade was like, well, I choked a 5-0 lead in my career, obviously referring to the full sale back in Black Ops 2. So he's at least able to joke about it a little bit right now, which is different from his a little more serious response after the minor.
Yeah. And then we had the last match of the weekend, Atlanta versus Minnesota. A pretty competitive hard point to start off this series. That Minnesota wins. They take a 1-0 lead in the series, but then Atlanta wins 3 straight. The Control just an utter stomp on behalf of FaZe. And I think FaZe might be back. This was a lot more convincing of a win against Minnesota, a team that really gave them a hard time in the minor. Minnesota probably gave them the hardest time of any team in that tournament. Certainly, pushed them to a game 5, if I'm not mistaken, and really looked like they could take that series. It really wasn't in doubt in this series. Like I said, they win that opening hardpoint, Minnesota did, but then FaZe just looked like the FaZe that we have kind of been expecting, anticipating at this point. and they win 3-1 and get a much needed win in the qualifiers, most importantly, because another loss here would have put them really in a horrible position, and probably would have, it wouldn't have guaranteed it, I think, but it would have, most likely put them in the lower bracket of the major, which would have been a huge development for that tournament. Any thoughts to kind of wrap up this week of the qualifiers with this match?
Yeah, another really entertaining match. One again coming into the season just based on expectations for both of these teams. You probably didn't expect it to be as entertaining in the minor, let alone as entertaining a second time around, just as recently as a week after the fact. So, that map one in particular was absolutely nuts. Came down to the end, 11-point win for Minnesota, and it was basically just Estriel and Nero. Estriel went 34-21, Nero 30 and 23, and the ARs on Minnesota, Paul and Gio, were like 13-14 and 20 something. Like they were both almost double negative. So it's really just pop off performances from Estriel and Nero, willing Minnesota to a close, hard fought victory. I really think I know I said it last time when we were going over the minor, but I've really been impressed with Estriel. Overall, I just feel like I don't know if it's different in this game as opposed to last game, but I feel like I've at least recently been seeing a lot more just pop off performances in the slaying department out of him. I feel like last year he was like that consistent player, like he would, go even. I think even on the year when we were looking at the rookie of the year debate and stuff, he had like almost a 1 KD. It was like on 0.96 or 0.98, something like that. So maybe that's just a sign of growth out of him, which would be awesome. Again, year two leap would be great for Minnesota, obviously, out of a young team like that, but it'd be great for Estriel if he's able to build off of his first year and continue to have these pop off games and just become a consistent slayer. That'd be really just awesome to see from a brand CDL perspective. Um, but after that map one, Atlanta kind of just took control of the series. They win 6-3, and the red card S&D sell went 11-5. But the thing they mentioned on the broadcast and that I noticed was Atlanta went 8-1 in first bloods in 9 rounds of search here. And I feel like historically we've seen that with Atlanta FaZe, but a lot of the times it's been like when a BZ just, goes into full Abizi mode and he's getting all the first bloods. But this time it was 8-1 out of they had 8 first bloods, Atlanta did, and it was like on the scoreboard breakdown, it was 2-1, 2-3. So I think Abizi might have had 2, but it wasn't one of those where like Atlanta had a ton of first bloods and it was all Abizi. It was evenly distributed among the 4 guys getting first bloods, and I think that's something that because you think about how good that Atlanta FaZe trio and Atlanta FaZe as a team has been at search historically, and part of that has been like Abizi being the guy to find that first bloods. But I think if the team is able to get that style and get an early man advantage without having to only rely on Abizi to do it, I think that just makes them that much more dangerous in search. So that's something I'm going to have my eyes on for Atlanta FaZe and search going forward. After that, we had a literal 7-minute and 52-second control. That was a 3-0 win for Atlanta, and followed that up by a 81 point win in the red card hardpoint where Jaza went 41-21. Which last map of the weekend, which seemingly had almost a 2 KD on an individual match in almost every match. I feel like I talked about at least one. And I felt like without looking at the actual numbers, this 41-21 Adraza has to be one of his best maps individually, statistically, early in this 2025 season. So that could be a good sign of things to come for Atlanta. But like you said, yeah, this was a match that Atlanta needed just based on where they are in the Major 1 standings, and they were able to get the job done. Tough week for Minnesota, on the other hand. 2 losses to Toronto and Atlanta, and I believe since you mentioned the Toronto loss being 3 losses in a row for the qualifiers, it should now be 4 losses in a row for Minnesota after going 2-0 in the opening week.
Yeah, they are not in a good position at this point. going into the final week of qualifiers, and they're going to need they're definitely going to need at least one win, it feels like, to get out of the losers bracket and into the winners bracket to start Major 1. I'm not sure if these standings are 100% or like how the order goes or the tiebreakers go, because, the Call of Duty League didn't tweet it out. They didn't say, what's going on. Let me look real quick on their website. Maybe they'll have something updated there. But obviously at the top, no matter what, you're going to have the Toronto Ultra. They're 6-0, the only undefeated team still remaining in these Major 1 qualifiers. They're 18-8 in map count, and they're looking really good. Then in second, OpTic Texas at 5-1. They have a 17-9 map count. And then there's a 3-way tie right now for third place. The Carolina Royal Ravens, Los Angeles Thieves, and Boston Breach are all 4-1. I don't know what the exact tiebreakers are. Like, according to the CDL website, they have Carolina at 3, LAT at 4, and Boston at 5. Maybe that's not correct. So I'm just trying to give you the information that I have currently. And then we have a 3-way tie for sixth place. And interestingly, or most importantly, that goes 6-8. So these 3 teams will be the last 3 teams to make it into the winners bracket. That's the Boston Breach. They're the Miami Heretics are in 6th. Then the Vancouver Surge and Atlanta FaZe. Those 3 teams are tied at 2 and 3. So if things held and these tiebreakers are all correct, Atlanta FaZe at 8 is about the worst possible position you could put the Toronto Ultra, to be like, all right, come on, like that's not fun at all. So that could happen, and we could see Toronto versus Atlanta round 1 at the Major with 2 of like the 3 or 4 best teams right out of the gate. And then the bottom 4 currently is 9th place Minnesota. Like you mentioned, they've lost 4 in a row in these qualifiers, so they're 2-4, 11-16 map count. Then you have LAG Gorillas Mate, or whatever you want to call it, Gentlemates or whatever. They're 1-5. They're tied with C9 New York, who are also 1-5, and then the Vegas Falcons, of course, are 0-6. I think they would probably be guaranteed into the losers bracket. They can only be 1-6 at their best, and Minnesota and Atlanta have already won 2, so they are certainly in the losers bracket to start Major 1, which not a shock, I think, to anybody out there. But C9 New York, Gorillas, Minnesota, possibly FaZe. Who knows what happens this coming week? It's a really, if you're kind of tuned out of the CDL or you haven't come back in after the holidays or whatever, I think this coming week of qualifying matches will be pretty interesting, because some teams will only play once, some teams will play twice, and there's a lot to play for, especially just to, like, maybe there's not a huge difference between like 7th and 6th, but there's a gigantic difference between 8 and 9 and and that kind of stuff. So you don't want to start in the losers bracket. That's mainly the main thing here. But yeah, that should be really, really fun to watch. The Pick'em, just on updates, you went 5-4 this week. I went 6-3. I think the big difference was I picked Boston instead of Carolina. So you're 29-15 on the season. I'm 25-19. And yeah, my voice is very scratchy. I'm getting better, so I'm not as sick as I was the last time we did the podcast, but talking for an hour and a half is certainly not great when you're even a little bit sick. So I'm tired of talking, but make sure to subscribe, like, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. YouTube, I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but I think they were at like 192 subscribers or something thereabouts. So we're nearing in on 200. Like I mentioned, I would love to get to 200 by like the end of Major 1 or before we start the qualifiers for Major 2. So we have a few weeks there. But please subscribe and like the videos if you can. Share them if you want. But we appreciate all the feedback and all the support. I mentioned, one of the comments earlier in the chat. So if you wanted to watch these live streams, you can do so. We're streaming them on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. So Sunday nights after the matches, of course, and then Wednesday nights, it kind of depends. Sometimes they're 10, 11, 12 p.m. Eastern, or 12 a.m. Eastern, I guess. real late night stuff. But we're usually here Wednesday and Sunday. Podcast will go up on Thursday and Monday. And we appreciate your support, whether you're watching live or listening to the podcast after the fact. We just love that you're on this journey with us. And make sure to follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I mentioned on the last episode, you can follow the race that Bink is currently on, and twitch.tv/jbink. That is JBINKK. So that you can watch that on Twitch. So we'll be back on for a live show on Wednesday, January 22nd, to preview the final week of qualifying matches, and then we'll give all our predictions and stuff. And we'll go from there. Maybe there will be some other developments from Sunday to Wednesday that we need to talk about. But I'll stop talking now so I can drink some water and relax. So Bink can sign us off from here on.
Yeah, like Preston said, thank you guys as always for all the support. And we're at 197 subscribers as of refreshing the YouTube stream right now. So we picked up a few of you guys during this episode, which is awesome. As usual, the YouTube stream's just been awesome and got a bunch of comments. So shout out guys, Rory Hansen, JPL3, Nicholas Siri, Fallen, and Eman R. Thank you guys for stopping into the live show and leaving comments and stuff. If you see Blizzard 257 in the comments there, that's just my old YouTube channel, and that's why I'm commenting from that. So it's not like some random guy is answering your questions. That's me. But yeah, thank you guys for all the support. Like Preston said, it'd really be awesome if we hit 200 subscribers before or after the major. Just feels like we've been on a steady climb recently, and it'd be awesome if that culminated in a nice round number around the time of the major. And we're almost there. This week was a really awesome week of qualifiers. I know it's hard at some points in the CDL slog of online matches to get excited about online Call of Duty. But I really enjoyed watching all the matches this weekend. I thought there were a bunch of just exciting moments and even some matches from some teams that you might not have expected a lot from. They had some moments that delivered. And like I said, there were a lot of maps that where individually one guy was popping off in at least almost every series. So a lot to like right now about, at least the COD esports product. You can have the debate about ranked play in COD and the hackers and all that other stuff at another time, but purely from a CDL perspective, this week in particular was an exciting one, and I think we're in for another exciting week of qualifiers next week, which will round us all out, leading into that major in Madrid the following week after that. And I am really excited to see Black Ops 6 LAN gameplay. Feels like it's been months, because it has been months since we've had actual LAN, unless you're talking about that case on LAN earlier in the season, but that was only a 4-team event. So a real CDL event on LAN, in the thick of it, trash talk. Hopefully, like that stage setup we saw at Champs where the players are facing each other and stuff. I'm getting amped up thinking about it, and I got to calm down a little bit because I got to go to bed. So overall, thank you guys as always for all the support. Looking forward to talking to you guys again later next week. And as always, remember to